This past week, well-known scientist and conservationist Dr. Jane Goodall died. Known in her early years for her work studying the behavior of chimpanzees in Tanzania, she is credited with being the first to observe that these chimps used tools, had extensive community patterns, demonstrated grief, and were capable of far more complex lives than had been previously imagined. Her love of these animals led to a lifetime of conservation efforts, and in her later years, she was passionate about teaching children the love of creation and compassion for all things. Netflix has a new series of interviews called Famous Last Words, which are only released after the person who was interviewed has died. Jane Goodall was the first episode that was released just days after her death. The conversation was wide-ranging and ended on a powerful call to hope. I loved the story she shared of her mother. She tells of being a child less than 2 years old who was fascinated by nature. She decides to bring some earthworms with all of their dirt into her bed, just to watch and see how they are able to get around without legs. She tells a later story of being gone missing, to where people were terrified and had no idea where she was. She was found in a hen house, watching for hours to see where on earth were these eggs coming from. She owns and says beautifully that many mothers would have been quite angry by such behavior, but her mother never failed to listen with rapt attention to what she was curious about and never punished her for disappearing or for making a mess. She says, "I am not sure I would be sitting here with you today if my mother had been a different person." The conclusion of the interview, her last words, are offered to a camera only, with the interviewer no longer present. What she says and wants especially the children of the world to know is that each and every one of us matters, that we have been given a role to play in the world, and that we must remain hopeful, because otherwise apathy will cause us not to act. She says the act of trying to save what is beautiful is important in dark times. And she reminds us that small acts done consistently and multiplied across many times and people make for great changes. I imagine these words would have resonated with the faith of the grandmothers and the mothers that are named in the second letter to Timothy this morning. The early Christian communities needed to know they were connected to something beyond themselves and find encouragement and instruction from them. The second letter of Timothy is one of those epistles we're not quite sure was penned directly by Paul, but the authorship doesn't take any power away from its words. It is a deeply relational letter and conveys wisdom to a community that is trying to work things out amidst struggle. The letter starts by calling the community to remember the faith of those who have come before, the faith of Lois and Eunice, grandmothers and mothers. I feel like we could use a little grandmotherly wisdom these days. And they say, remember the power of God. For this reason, I remind you to rekindle the gift of God that is within you through the laying on of my hands. For God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but rather a spirit of power and of love and of self-discipline. I love that image of rekindling the gift that God has given us. It is an important reminder that our faith journey is rarely a straight line. We do not always find ourselves on fire with the confidence of the Spirit, but simple acts of faith and love can make all the difference. To be reminded that we can rekindle something may feel less daunting than having to go out and start completely over. particularly with so much that can discourage us in these times, whether in our own country or abroad. A quiet, calm voice of hope can have great power. Jane Goodall was able to have such a broad impact throughout her life because she told stories. She invited people to look at the world in a different way. We could not see the creation and imagine we were not connected to it when we saw her engaging with her beloved chimps without fear. The journey of faith can be daunting, but the answers that are found in the simple steps we make each and every morning are what sustain us. I wonder if that is really what Jesus is trying to get at with his admonishment to the disciples this morning in our gospel lesson. The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." The Lord replied, "If you had the faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you." Jesus is still on the road to Jerusalem, and for those of us who've been traveling with him in recent weeks, we may very well understand this request on the disciples' part: increase our faith. We have been asked to give up a lot these last weeks: possessions, family, security, all that we know and understand to be the structure and fabric of our lives. I was joking earlier this week that I'm never happy to hit this stretch of the lectionary because it doesn't seem the right way to get the program year off to a strong start. If somebody's trying to come back to church or we're trying to encourage people to steward their lives and think about community, these would not be the texts that I would have selected. But the fact is, I suspect many of us come to church to find encouragement and community, not easy answers. We're looking for safe places to ask our questions and share our burdens. We already know there are challenges. The lament of the prophets is not something we find foreign, but all too familiar. And perhaps a group of disciples who seem a little bit overwhelmed by the task in front of them may be just what we need to hear this day. If those who were walking on the road with Jesus still wondered how and what they could continue to draw on to continue walking, maybe that honors our own questions and struggles. At first, we might hear Jesus' response as a rebuke. Why are you asking for more faith? You only need a speck of seed to do wonders. But I don't hear the image of a mustard seed as a rebuke when I also have the image of rekindling setting next to it. If a fire can be rekindled from dying embers, a mustard seed encourages me that I don't have to worry about measuring the size of my faith. Rather, I'm being invited to walk my faith in very manageable steps, minute by minute, day by day. This is the wisdom of grandmothers who look back over the course of a life and call us to not lose hope. To continue to act in itself is a pledge of hope beyond the fear or despair of the moment. Maybe that's what Jesus is getting at when he reminds us of the work of the servants. This language of slavery can rattle a little bit weirdly in our ears now, but we have to remember that Jesus put himself in the posture of service. And so when he asks us to put ourselves in that same place, I think it's an invitation to yield ourselves to the divine work we are called to do. The servant doesn't have the luxury of planning their faith walk. They attend to the task in front of them when they rise to when they sleep. What Jesus is inviting us to recognize is when we attend to those needs that are right in front of us, we find the path and the faith required to respond to God's calling. I imagine Jesus knows the size of the task is overwhelming to us. And rather than worrying about the size of our faith or whether we're up to it, I think he says, just keep walking. To find the people who rekindle our faith when the times seem too dark. Our formation often happens in simple and small ways. Little actions change us and we change others through them. We may only see the impact after years of practice. When we look for what we are called to do in faith, It is much more like this simple poem from Emily Dickinson. If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. If I can ease one life the aching or cool one pain, or help one fainting robin into his nest again, I shall not live in vain. Amen.